Thank you, Yancy, for that introduction, and good morning to everyone that's on the webinar this morning. I'll just be taking you through some of the work that the CSIR Energy Centre has been doing, looking at skills as it relates to the transition. The outline of the presentation that I'll be doing includes just some scene setting slides, and then I'll provide a brief overview of the skills-related projects that we've been working on, some of our findings, and then a conclusion or takeaway, which is informed by our work. Just by way of background, a few years ago, the CSIR Energy Centre would have looked at the IRP 2019, which is the latest promulgated version of the document that we have. I know there was a version that was out for public comment, but the 2019 version had included the country's plans to retire some of the coal-fired power stations while introducing some renewables. And the team had modeled the direct and indirect jobs that would be lost through the retirement of the coal fleet, which you see as that negative 46,000, and then some of the jobs that we stood to gain through the introduction of renewables, particularly wind and solar that you see in the blue and yellow on the slide. Of course, the IRP 2019 hasn't been implemented as planned, and so I use this graph as just to illustrate a point, which is that jobs will be lost in the coal sector. I think we all know that. And the losses that were considered here only looked at the direct and indirect jobs that would be linked just to the closure of the power stations. But there is, of course, still the broader, coal mining sector and its value chains. And while there have been jobs that we've gained through the introduction of renewables, I think as part of this conversation, we need to be asking ourselves whether those jobs will be created will be in the coal regions, which is where they're required. And if they're not, what interventions are being developed so that we avoid exacerbating our unemployment, poverty, and inequality challenges as a country, and all of the social ills that we know result from those challenges. Given that reality, why do we prioritize skills? In our work, I think we see it as an investment, one that is of, sort of strategic importance, because it assists us in addressing not only our ongoing electricity crisis, but it does also support the energy transition to ensure that it will be just, because it enables the country to build capacity for innovation and support the adoption of all of these new technologies that we're seeing being introduced in our energy mix. It also contributes to the extent that is possible, enhancing the operational efficiencies of entities like Eskom and others that are involved in the electricity and broader energy sector value chains. And then it also assists in addressing policy and regulatory challenges. A lot of the work that's done in the renewable energy skills domain speaks a lot to the STEM-related occupations, which are critical. But with our, ever-changing landscape, which includes the unbundling of Eskom, it means we need to have skilled professionals with expertise in energy policy, regulation, and governance, because they ultimately shape the environment within which all of these challenges need to be addressed. This slide speaks to the rapidly evolving market, which has in part been enabled by the amendment of the Electricity Regulation Act, just going beyond what's been facilitated by the Renewable Independent Power Producer Program. I think I might have missed a P there. But since 2011, when the first bid window was announced, we've had about 9,000 odd megawatts being contracted through projects from REAP. And a lot of the skills-related conversations that we've had since have focused on this program and being able to meet demand that will service projects that are being constructed through this program, but the market is evolving quite rapidly. The persisting load shedding has led to market reforms, encouraging, sort of a lot of private sector participation for generation projects of any size. And the graph that you see on the left-hand side there is the number of private generators that were registered on the NERSA portal prior to 2021. I think you see a number of about 131 megawatts. And in August 2021, the legislation was amended and the licensing threshold was lifted from 1 to 100 megawatts. And we saw the number of private generators jumping up to about 838 megawatts. In September 2022, there was a complete removal of that licensing threshold. And since then, we've seen the number of generators increasing quite significantly over the past about 16 months to about 6,000 megawatts that are registered. Of course, not all these projects may materialize, but I think it's a strong indicator that whatever planning and interventions we've had going as it relates to REAP, we would need to be scaling up quite significantly, looking at the interest that there is in the market. The unbundling of Eskom also brings with it many new skills that may be required, which we may not have and would need to start planning for. And so in the next couple of slides, I'll just be taking you through some of the research that we've been doing in the CSIR Energy Center as it relates to skills and the just energy transition. The first slide is a project, it's called the Co-Benefits Project. In my first slide, I spoke about how jobs that need to be created where they are required. And as a country, we are running the risk of this not being the case. The map on the slide shows the 89 operational projects from bid window 1 to 5, which are giving us this 6,000 megawatts that I referred to in the previous slide. And you'll see on the slide that only one of the operational projects from REAP are in Mpumalanga, and it's a small 25 megawatt facility. And so what we sought to do through this work was to inform policymakers at the time about the socio-economic implications of deploying renewable energy projects in Mpumalanga specifically. We've started to see Seriti and others starting to develop projects in the province due to grid constraints where perhaps the renewable energy resources are better than in Mpumalanga. And that these projects are going up is a good thing, but there is still serious concern that the decommissioning of the coal power stations is concentrated in this province. And while solar and wind does create jobs, it's not to the same scale as the coal plants. In the report, we'd highlighted some of the important framework conditions that would be required in order to maximize some of these benefits that we'd identified relating to your employment effects, skills development, and gender needs, as well as industrial opportunities. There was a total of 9 framework conditions that we identified. Some linked to the need to implement policies that enable the development of projects in the province, and then others focusing on interventions that can increase local assembly manufacturing capabilities, and the support that SEZs can play in enabling that. But from a skills perspective and gender inclusivity perspective, the report had identified the need to develop skills through the TVET colleges in order to facilitate the graduates' entry into the renewable energy market. And then from a gender inclusivity perspective, it would be those practical considerations that prevent women from participating in the sector. We know that these projects are often sort of far-flung areas. And given that we live in a country where childcare is still primarily done by women, It's these practical interventions like having, for example, childcare facilities near training centers, and I would even say project sites, because after those women have been trained, they do need to show up for work every day. And if the environment is not conducive, then we struggle to retain women in the sector. And then the last, also speaking to women, was entrepreneurial development that focuses specifically on women. We know that in South Africa, SMMEs contribute about 60%, 59, 60% of economy-wide employment, and women need to be able to participate in the different value chains so they can also make a contribution. The second project that we did was a reskilling project that we've done in collaboration with Rest for Africa, where we determined the skills that would be required for renewable energy value chains. And our focus in this study was on solar PV and onshore wind. And I think that's just given the allocation of the capacities for these technologies in the IRP 2019. And we had developed a reskilling framework for core workers who would migrate into the renewable energy value chains. Of course, we focused on Mpumalanga again, because as I mentioned in the previous slide, it's no good saying we are creating jobs in renewables and contributing to the sustaining of livelihoods if those jobs are not in areas where workers are being displaced. We followed a value chain approach. On the left-hand side, there's the wind value chain and the jobs we'd identified. And then on the right-hand side is solar. Because again, there is value in saying that we need engineers and project managers in the renewable energy sector. But even more valuable if you're able to identify which parts of the value chain those occupations are required in, because only then would you be able to identify the types of interventions you would require to support the migration of individuals from one sector to another. And the spin-off of this work has been a pilot project that's been implemented at Nkangala TVET College in collaboration with the EWCETA, as well as Rest for Africa. And it started with the Train the Trainer program for about 10 lecturers who have been upskilled to deliver the renewable energy course. And then the second phase started in April of last year, and it's running over 18 months, training electrical engineering students, giving them exposure to renewable energy competencies, including sort of practical experience working with the whether it's the panels or the turbines. And this will include a 6-month internship in a renewable energy company. This is just one pilot that I'm citing, but we're of the view that initiatives like these, given the direction that we're going in, need to be scaled up and then championed by government as well. EWCETA is a government entity providing funding to the program, but it was largely driven by Rest for Africa. The next project that we've just recently completed on behalf of the Department of Education and Higher Education and Training as part of the Labour Market Intelligence Program. Here, again, we followed a value chain approach in identifying the occupations that would be required for the green hydrogen economy in South Africa. I think this is an important study because the energy sector is broader than just electricity. In fact, the broader energy sector contributes to about 73.2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And it includes what are termed hard-to-abate sectors. And this includes the likes of your heavy-duty transport, industrial sectors like cement, steel, refineries, chemicals sector, agriculture, and so on. And their decarbonization pathways are less straightforward than the electricity sector. And green hydrogen has been identified as an energy source that can assist in the decarbonization of these sectors. The South African government has articulated its green hydrogen ambitions, both for domestic use and to decarbonize some of domestic use, to decarbonize some of these hard-to-abate sectors, and then also to play in the export market, given the increase in demand for green hydrogen from different countries. And these ambitions, I think, are articulated in different documents, such as the Hydrogen Valley Report, the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, and more recently, the Cabinet-approved commercialization strategy. The industry is still nascent in the country, but the DHET decided to proactively plan for the development of skills to service the economy when it does emerge. Because when demand does start to pick up, industry would not be waiting for us to, revise our curriculums and reskill and upskill. And so we would run the risk of, again, importing skills to service these different segments of the value chain. And so in the work, we identified occupations that would be required across different segments of the value chain, and then the hydrogen-related capabilities that those occupations would need to have. In total, we identified 138 occupations and 185 hydrogen-specific capabilities for each of those occupations. We had a look at the qualifications that would be required for those occupations and did an analysis of the relevance of the degrees and diplomas that are currently being offered in our higher education institutions. The analysis also included the TVET college qualifications, looking at both the NATED and the NCV qualifications, as well as the occupational qualifications that are supported by the different SETAs, to see what level of augmentation would be required for the different programs at different levels. And we also had a look at the existence and adequacy of work-based learning opportunities to support the development of the sector. The slide just summarizes the findings from the report, which is that South Africa does have a lot of the occupations that are required. Remember, hydrogen as a concept is not new in South Africa. Sasol currently produces about 3 to 4% of global green hydrogen demand. And so we were able to find occupations that currently exist. Of course, this wouldn't be in large quantities because there are very few chemicals companies outside of Sasol that are producing grey hydrogen. In looking at the qualifications, we also were able to identify that our universities, as well as the TVET college ecosystem, does offer a lot of the qualifications that are required, but there would be a level of augmentation that's required for both the occupations as well as the qualifications to include those different hydrogen capabilities that I mentioned in the previous slide, and then to a much smaller extent, the introduction of new qualifications and the creation of new occupations. And then, of course, because the industry is still so nascent, a lot of the existing work-based learning opportunities were in the grey hydrogen space. But we do expect, similar to what we saw in our analysis, that internationally, when the green hydrogen industry is established, then the work-based learning opportunities follow. But we would just need to ensure that they include those green hydrogen capabilities. And so currently, because of the nascency of the industry, we don't currently have a skills shortage, but there is a risk that the demand will exceed supply as the industry is established. Similar to the electricity industry, this industry is also very STEM focused. And we know that there is already a shortage of STEM-related professionals to service the existing industries. And so if we aren't preparing the skills that would be required for green hydrogen, we run the risk of not having enough when it is required. In the long term, we made proposals around the revision of curriculum in our education system, and then formalizing training of lecturers and trainers This is not a challenge that's unique to South Africa. I think across we looked at various countries that have developed skills needs assessment, and this was flagged as a common challenge across whether you're looking at Europe, Canada, Australia, France. And so in the long run, we would also need to consider the formalization of this process. But as demand increases, it's not going to wait for us to revise our curriculum and have these formal arrangements for training lecturers. And so as interventions that can be considered, we propose the development of CPD programs, and then also promoting learner and trainer mobility to other countries that are at least further ahead of the curve than we are. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this sector is also quite STEM focused, and we would need to be encouraging learners at the primary and secondary school level to enroll for STEM subjects, because they would ultimately be the pipeline that graduates from both our universities as well as the TVET college system. And then linked to that is also encouraging people to consider green hydrogen as a career of choice. We, on these webinars, become quite familiar with the language, the wording, the opportunities, but we need to be sort of socializing communities, students, and even workers in declining sectors to consider green hydrogen as an industry of choice. Again, looking at work outside of the energy sector, we completed a study looking at a social protection plan for Mpumalanga. The JET IP does have about 2.4 billion that's earmarked for supporting the diversification of local economies. And this is an important activity where there will be closures of coal power station. Identifying those alternative sectors is going to be key. But beyond that, we would also need to couple that with the development of skills to be able to service those sectors. And in our work package, we'd evaluated some economic diversification options for Mpumalanga, looking at the mining sector, the energy sector. We're already starting to see projects cropping up in that space. And then other sectors, which would include your agriculture and agri-processing, tourism, agrivoltaics, manufacturing, just to name a few. I think previously I'd also had mentioned that SMMEs contribute to about 60% of economy-wide employment. We know that the transition will see companies lose business, especially those in Mpumalanga and others in different parts of the country that have links to the value chains of the power stations. And in the context of the transition and South Africa working towards achieving its net zero ambitions by 2050, we are sure to see an increase in the deployment of renewable energy projects. The REAP offered private sector opportunities to construct, operate, and maintain a lot of the renewable energy facilities. But what we found is that the participation of SMMEs has been limited sort of to your non-core segments of the value chains, which limits their growth and potential impact that they can have on employment. Other challenges that were flagged by SMMEs that we'd surveyed included a shortage of enterprise development programs that respond to the needs of SMMEs in the sector. I don't think there's a shortage of SMME support programs, but they felt they had very specific challenges that they needed support with. And so in partnership with the EWCETA, we developed the Energy Industry Support Program, where we support SMMEs in two ways. One is a capacity building program for SMMEs that are looking to participate in the sector, but don't know what opportunities exist across the different value chains for different technologies. And then the second component includes incubating SMMEs that are already operating in the space who need technical support with their business offering. This provides, I think, a great platform for the CSIR to lend its expertise to de-risking innovative ideas that are currently not being funded. And so as I conclude, I think the one takeaway that we've seen in all of these different projects that we've worked on is that policy certainty is queen. And I use queen because the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. But it really is quite critical in not only assisting with investors to plan their investment decisions and project developers to also plan their investment decisions, but for skills planning decisions as well. And this is important because if you're not identifying what skills are required, if you're not training anyone, then you have no workforce. And South Africans will essentially not be able to participate in these emerging and growing sectors, whether you're talking expansion in the deployment of renewable energy technologies or the development of a green hydrogen economy. And we found that upskilling and higher education are a prerequisite for a successful transition. We need to have dedicated programs and institutions and need to have partnerships with industry, whether it's for internships or apprenticeship opportunities. And for emerging economies like green hydrogen, for whom the demand will not wait for us to revise our curriculum, consider partnerships with public and private international organizations that are a little bit further ahead of the curve than we are for these train-the-trainer exchange programs, the development of CPD programs. And then across everything that we do need to be mainstreaming gender because women are still underrepresented in the sector. We also need to be quite intentional about raising awareness about opportunities that exist in the sector. The raising of these opportunities or making individuals aware about the opportunities that exist in the sector will empower them to be able to participate. And then the last was we must develop reskilling frameworks for the different technologies that we are introducing in our energy mix. The more specific we can be about these frameworks, the better, so that people are able to pivot into new sectors and we ensure that the transition is indeed just and leaves nobody behind. Thank you.